say it's impossible, he can't be dead, but he was dead. 10 years before that, when he had to retreat to Medina, to Yathrib, because it was quite likely he was going to be killed in Mecca if he stayed, he created something called, it's either the Constitution or the Charter of Medina. And what it was a pact to ensure the rights of everybody in the community, not just Muslims. It's very explicit. Security of God, equal for all groups. Non-Muslim members have equal political and cultural rights as Muslim. They will have autonomy and freedom of religion. Non-Muslims will not be obliged to take part in religious wars of the Muslims. It's right there. Not to say that there weren't attempts later to undo that and forget about it and so on, but that's what the Constitution said in Medina. Number 2, Caliph al-Bakr, the loyal follower. He did his best. He said, I'm not the prophet. I don't have those gifts. But he said, I'm going to do my best, but you have to help me. If I do a good job, then help me do what I do. And if I'm not doing a good job, then come up and tell me. And if you don't tell me the truth, that's treason. That's a form of lying. They were creating an ideal of a flat leadership style of consultation, not an imperial kind of thing or an autocratic thing. Also some great things about the weak and the strong and so on, trying to create a fair society. And then Ali. What a tragic time he had. Always opposition to whether he was entitled to be caliph or not. He finally made it number 4. He only had 5 years. But he wrote a beautiful, among many things, all these correspondences that are available for inspection. One was to Malik, who was governor of an area in the caliphate. He said, remember, Malik, that amongst your subjects there are 2 kinds of people, those who have the same religion as you, they are brothers to you, and those who have religions other than that of you, they are human beings like you. It's real clear. There it is. All right, all this tolerant, enlightened, progressive stuff didn't happen on a sand dune. It happened primarily in communities and large cities. And if you want to find a city that was dazzling, if you ever want to find the real city of Oz, it was Baghdad for 500 years. I'm not going to say as much right now about the Harun and his son al-Mamun, but a wonderful example of coexistence and diversity. Now, certainly the ruling system was Muslim, but there were all sorts of people invited to come there and work. I mean, it was kind of like Toronto or New York or London. People of all colors and creeds were flocking there because there was money there was work there, and there was smart stuff going on. Arabs, of course. There were Nestorian Christians who had been expelled from Byzantium, and the Arab rulers were just very happy to have these smart folks come and work for them. Lots of Persians, Iraq and Persia. It's really hard to draw a line between them. They're so intertwined, although in the current day people are trying to split them apart, but I think it's impossible. Lots of Indians working there in Baghdad. Al-Khwarizmi used a lot of Indians in his mathematical research and papers from an earlier Hindu mathematician, Brahmagupta. Lots of Africans. The first great African Muslim thinker, Al-Jahiz, who in the 9th century, in the 800s, articulated a theory of the natural selection of species preceding Darwin by 1,000 years. Now, he couldn't prove it the way Darwin did, but he intuited it and expressed it really well. And then the Jews, some Jews converted, others didn't. To have a diverse society, you have to be intellectually diverse. And the first great Arab philosopher, Al-Kindi, also working in Baghdad at that time, just said it right out. He said, "We ought not to be embarrassed about appreciating the truth and obtaining it wherever it comes from, even if it comes from races distant and nations different from us. Nothing should be dearer to the seeker of truth than the truth itself." Harun People have heard of him because of the 1001 Nights. He's doing lots more than, I mean, that's entertainment. But in fact, he created the seeds of the world's first think tank, the House of Wisdom. He was also a patron of and beneficiary of a Muslim group that doesn't exist anymore, a school called the Mu'tazili, who believed that the key to revelation was through reason and thought. He tried really hard to integrate Persia and Arabia. He also tried to bring Sunni and Shia back together again, and that didn't stop with him. He used to go in disguise with his sons and go out wandering through the city to listen to what people were saying. And he wasn't doing that so he could chop their heads off. He was trying to find out how his government was doing, and he didn't trust his ministers to tell him the truth. It's the first form of political opinion polling. Harun did such a good job that Charlemagne envied and worshipped and was like, how can I be like you? And always inviting him up to France. Why would a ruler of half the world who was very literate and enlightened want to go to a poor, cold, wet backwater in France? He never accepted the invitation, but they sent each other gifts back and forth. Cairo, although there were many phases of this, the one group that I always salute, the Fatimid period in Cairo, which was about 200 years long, in which the leadership was Shia, Muslim, and then Coptic Christians had a really good position there, as did Jews. In fact, they had such a good position that the Sunni were complaining that, hey, the Fatimids like the Jews and Christians more than they like us. Well, there may have been some truth to that, but they all lived there and worked there together. It wasn't divided up into, and there was no ethnic cleansing or anything. Founding Al-Azhar University, one of the greatest universities in the world. I've been there, I've even spoken there. And another think tank called the House of Knowledge. And this is going on lots of other places, Al-Andalus in Spain, this Convivencia, which was the coexistence tradition that went on. The Arabs and Muslims were in Spain for 781 years. That's a really long time. A lot of Spanish are not aware of the length of that. Sicily, 300 years. India, what a better example of enlightened governments and tolerance of diversity than a Muslim group of maybe 10% of the population with a population of 90% Hindu and other groups, and pulling it off for centuries, not just by force, but by all sorts of attempts at integration. Central Asia, even the Mongols were once you got on their right side, they were pretty tolerant. But if you weren't on their right side, no. And then the Hajj, I'm told, this mingling of people from all over, it engenders this tradition of mixing, and everybody is all together and equal, and there's no hierarchy there. Here's a wonderful statement about good leadership from Spain. The third emir of Umayyad Spain, Emir Hisham. Dispense justice without distinction between the poor and the rich. Be kind and gentle to those dependent upon thee, for all alike are the creatures of God. Entrust the keeping of thy cities and provinces to loyal and experienced chieftain. Chastise without pity ministers who oppress thy subjects. This was a letter that he wrote to his son just before his son took over, telling him, how do you be a good leader? Unfortunately, the son had a drinking problem and fell apart. Human beings, but they were trying. Machiavelli is considered the father of modern Western political theory. I think that's true. He was conflicted. It was hard to tell whether he was a monarchist or a Republican, because he wrote both positions very well, but Westerners have him up on a pedestal, and he belongs there. But I don't know if he was the first one to be enlightened. Nizam al-Mulk. Raise your hand if you've heard of this person. Oh, good, all right. This is not a typical audience, because a lot of places I go, I just get blank stares. Not only was he the patron of the great Omar Khayyam, a phenomenal mathematician as well as poet and thinker, he wrote a thing called the Book of Government, which is a guidebook for rulers and leaders. Very progressive and enlightened, considering it was 500 years before Machiavelli. And he also is the namesake of this network of universities called Nizamiya. I think they still may exist in Iran and other places. The best of rulers is he who keeps the company of men of learning, and the worst of learned men is he who seeks the society of the king. Pretty good. Saladin, great guy, great military leader, brought honor to his people and his followers, but not just because he won battles, because he was a compassionate and merciful victor. He was incredibly generous. In victory, he helped Richard the Lionhearted, I think at least 3 times. Richard was about to be killed by the Arab forces, and because he'd lost his horse and he's down on foot surrounded by Arabs, and Saladin gave him a horse and let him go. When he was sick with the flu, Saladin sent his Jewish doctor, Maimonides, Musa bin Maimun, to go treat him and make him well. When Saladin retook Jerusalem after 100 years of the Crusaders, he was told by his advisors, take vengeance for what the Christians did to us. And the Christians, when they came in, were wretched. They killed tens of thousands. This is from European accounts. From French accounts of the Crusades, it's just horrible. And Saladin was under pressure to pay back. And instead, when he had 100,000 Christian prisoners in Jerusalem, he said, no, I'm not going to kill them. I'm going to let them pay a little exit fee. I think it was about $5, something very modest. 70,000 of the prisoners had the money, and some were millionaires, Orthodox priests and so on, and they paid and went. There were 30,000 left, and the advisor was saying, okay, these are the ones that should be slain. And he said, is that what we want to show the world? He paid out of his own pocket to ransom 30,000 people and died in poverty. He was such a magnanimous person that Dante Alighieri, who's hardly a Muslim in the Muslim fan club, in his Divine Comedy, put Saladin in a special category. He wasn't in heaven because he wasn't a Christian. He wasn't down in limbo with Aristotle and Pythagoras and so on. He put Saladin in a one-man box called Great-Hearted Souls. And this is from an Italian Catholic, how many centuries ago. The Ottoman sultans. The Ottomans taught the Europeans how to be diverse and tolerant. It's just that the Europeans weren't listening. When Isabella and Ferdinand did what they did, no one really understands why. It was such a turn for them, because Isabella used to dress in Arab garb. She spoke Arabic. Her ancestors, all of the Christian kings of her family, had been tricultural. And when she turned and started the expulsion, Sultan Bayezid in Istanbul said, well, if the Spanish kings are dumb enough to kick out their smartest people, let them come here. And thousands of Jews left Spain and went to Istanbul. And this painting here, I don't think you can see it, but that's the Sultan welcoming the Sephardic Jews on the dock in Istanbul. More than one Grand Vizier in the Ottoman Empire was Christian. The civil service was almost entirely Christian from the Balkans. The headquarters of the Orthodox Church was and still is in Istanbul. Unfortunately, Europe just wasn't there yet. It would take them to go all the way into the 20th century and the Holocaust by the most powerful country in Europe to teach them that's not the right way to have a society. But the Turks were doing it a long time ago, and they still are trying to do it, although the world is now shifting into something else. Finally, I get to a woman. I'm so sorry. I need research. I need help. I know there's a Saudi woman doing a lot of work on Muslim women mathematicians and scientists, but here's an enlightened leader in India, a woman. Her father was Sultan in Delhi, and when it came time, he knew he was going to die, and he was sick, and he looked at his 3 sons. I think there were 3, and he looked, and he thought, what a bunch of idiots. He picked Razia against all tradition, against what the advisors were saying. They were like, what are you doing? He said, they're idiots. Razia is going to do it. And she did it for 5 years. And she did it because she had the support of the Hindu majority of the country. She